What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be a little different from you watching me do stuff to my car or you watching me drift. We're going to break down how much it will cost you to build a CTS-V drift car. If you wanted to go down the path of drifting a CTS-V, jumping into a long wheelbase, LS powered rear wheel drive platform, this is the video for you. I remember I did a video way back about drifting my 3000 GT and like what that cost. And I mean, ultimately it did pretty well, but I think it shed a lot of information to people that were considering it. And ultimately that, it might not have been the best idea at the end of the day. Now, those of you that have followed me for a long time or that have known me for a long time, I typically drift some unconventional vehicles. And while the CTS-V might have come off as unconventional in the beginning, I think at the end of the day, it kind of all made sense once the car started working and once there was an aftermarket support in the drifting world for the cars. That's where Stansco comes into play. I had to make the aftermarket support. But now that the aftermarket support is there, it's way easier for somebody else to jump into one of these cars and get started. So let's get started on how much this is going to cost. I'm going to get my list out. We're going to run through all the things that I've done to my car that were necessary to make it drift. I've made tons of tweaks and changes to the car as time went on, but these are the things that if it'll get you on track and drifting well, you can always improve on other things later. So let's jump in. Now you can start with one of these, a base model CTS. Now they made the first generation CTS from 2003 to 2007. This particular one is an 07, it is the last of the generation, but it's a base model. Now, a couple notable things between a base model and a V is, well, you guessed it, the drivetrain. Base model came with a 3.6 liter that made like 200 and high 200s for power, I think it was. And then it was plagued with timing issues, which this one ultimately suffered from. So if I had to say, if you just want to start and make it the easiest start, I would just go right to a V. It's gonna cost more money up front, but at the end of the day, it's gonna be a lot less headache and probably less money when it come down to it, because these cars, while being very similar to the V, you have to LS swap them. You need to acquire an iron block, I'm assuming you would go with, or an LS, and then you need to acquire a T56, and then you need to acquire some other bits and bobs, wiring harness, and things like that, that by that point, you're kind of already, between the cost of a car, even if it's a roller, you're kind of already nearing the bottom dollar you can get like a higher mileage V4. So you can go the base model route, but this video is going to be more of the CTS-V starting point. And a lot of guys have started with base models, but for this video, we're going to start with something simpler. Now, this is the part where you would go ahead and you'd find yourself a nice first gen CTS-V. Now the CTS-V comes with the LS drivetrain. You need either a 5.7 liter LS6 or a 6.0 liter LS2, a T56 transmission, rear wheel drive configuration, and you're pretty much ready to go off the bat. So we're gonna talk about car acquisition costs. Now, you can certainly get a V1 for the under $10,000 mark. Now, my Drift V, which we'll go over to in a minute here, cost me $5,500 back in 2021. It had 237,000 miles, but it was a good running, rust-free, clean car. So for the sake of this, we're gonna price out my car. I think my car is probably nowadays more around the $7,000 mark, but we're gonna say $5,500 for a high mileage running CTS-V, first gen car. I should also mention all first gen CTS-Vs are manual with a T56. So that is one thing that is definitely worth mentioning here. So here we have my Drift V. This is my $5,500 car. Had a little faded clear coat on it, but ultimately it was a rust-free car underneath that had a good running drivetrain, although it had higher mileage. Now, we're gonna start with some of the necessary things for drifting. And one of those is going to be coilovers. So the stock Vs have some performance struts and they sit kind of high. We were definitely going to look into coilovers. So we went with BC coilovers. You can do the BR series for $1,300, or you can do the DS series for $1,500. So this car has the DS series coilovers. It's a digressive rate damping, and they were $1,500. And then jumping into the interior on another drift specific part, and that is going to be the roll cage. Now, this roll cage cost me $3,500 to make, or to have built. It is a 6-point cage, so it's a 4-point cage with anti-intrusion bars down in the front here. So it is a full, I guess you could say, FD legal cage. And then that was $3,500. Next, for a crucial drift mod, was the LS7 clutch kit. So these cars come with a dual mass flywheel, and it kind of sucks. So a lot of guys will upgrade to a single mass flywheel with an LS7 factory clutch kit, and that's pretty much good for what these cars are going to make NA, and that is about $500. Then we jump into the seats. So we went with full halo seats on both sides, Sparco Circuit 2 QRTs, and these seats were $1,000 each. So we were at $2,000 for seats. And then to mount them, Pure Performance Texas makes seat brackets, and I think it's about $650 for seat brackets. And then we have harnesses, they're SFI rated harnesses that land in at about, they were $180 each. The steering wheel, we removed the bulky factory steering wheel with the airbag. So we got ourselves an NRG adapter hub. Pretty sure that one also works for Corvettes. That was $150. A NRG quick release, that was $100. A nice leather grip royal wheel, that was $190. And then our button relocation down here, also from Pure Performance, that was $50. And that allows us to still, while we removed the buttons from the factory steering wheel, and it allows us to cycle through our screens to see things like oil temp, oil pressure, trans temp, and all that stuff, all the digital readouts. Now we start jumping into things like the handbrake. So our ASD handbrake, now these are all, I'm just covering like the drift requirement parts for these cars, and then we'll get into some of the other like upgrades to the chassis itself that aren't necessarily drift specific. So the ASD handbrake was $280, and then we have that plumbed in. Well, we have it mounted with a Stansco handbrake mount plate, that's $60, and we have it plumbed in with a Stansco handbrake line kit, and that is, I think that's like $180, I think it is. So it comes back to our Stansco dual caliper bracket, that is $155, and then we have two Brembo calipers that we added to the rear. These are just factory Brembo calipers. They cost $300 from Rock Auto. So that is pretty much our whole dual caliper setup. These cars have a foot parking brake, so you ultimately need that unless you do an inline, which kind of complicates things on these cars. But either way, I think that's the simplest solution, and it provides for the best feel. And then coming up front, we have the Stansco angle kit that is tucked back in here. So we've got our Stansco angle kit, and with the extended brake hoses, that costs $975, and that provides us with much more steering angle than what the stock knuckles can provide, and a much better steering feel than what we experienced when we had cut knuckles on the car. Chassis, non-drift specific chassis related things. We had the We did a full polyurethane bushing kit and poly motor mounts to the car. Not necessarily necessary to drift the car, so I'm not going to include them on this. This is just going to be drift specific parts for the V to get it on track. But I am going to include the cam and stuff like that, because I feel like if you're going on track, you got to have a choppy cam, and you also need some improved cooling capabilities. So we have these massive hood vents. They are second gen Camaro hood vents from TrackSpec, and they run at about $330. But when you pair them with the factory V grill here, where you have all that air going through there, I've literally had it where I've put a piece of paper up against the grill and the paper stuck to it, and then I put the paper on the vent and it literally just blew it off over the car. This is our high mileage LS6. When we took this thing apart, we just did a regasket. Again, that was personal preference. Your car might not necessarily need it because it had like some leaking valve covers and things like that. And then we also put a high volume oil pump in it that I think was like $200 for the high volume oil pump. And then we kind of just took it apart to do a basic refresh on it. We pulled the heads off. We paid about $300 to do the machine work in the heads. We did a full cam kit. It's a Summit Stage 4 cam kit. That included everything we needed for the heads. I think we did some BTR push rods, and all in all, the cam kit, the valve train, and the push rods was about $1,000. And then we also, this is a really important part, all the way down there you can see we have a Summit Racing 25% underdrive crank pulley. That was about $190, and that really helped when it came to our power steering system. The V's, I've blown up stock pumps doing donuts in my street car, where having this 25% underdrive pulley really spins these things less and keeps your power steering way happier. So that is one thing to note. You probably will need a new balancer anyways, because they're known to separate. So that Summit Racing underdrive balancer will really help preserve the life of your alternator and your power steering at high RPM. But then also to tag in with those hood vents, we've upgraded our cooling to basically its max capacity in a OEM style configuration. We have a cold case aluminum radiator. This is a dual pass radiator. It is literally double the thickness. The core is double the thickness of the factory radiator with the plastic end tanks. This is full aluminum, TIG welded. Pretty much set it, forget it, you're good to go. And then we have the Bono Specialties silicone radiator hoses. These things are beefy and they are much nicer than if we just stuck with like a rubber hose, just the durability aspect of them. And they can add a little pop of color. They're offered in different colors, so you can add a little pop of color in your engine bay. The hood vents were $330. A cold case radiator is $500, but it's gonna be the last radiator you need to buy. And then the Bono hoses are $200, and these will also probably be the last radiator hoses you have to buy. So this is one of those things where like, do it, get it out of the way, and like, you're good. You know, the car will take the abuse with these components on there. And we have headers that are $250. They're just eBay headers, and we bolted it up to the exhaust that was already on the car, which is ultimately straight piped. Then with the cam and all that, we had to get the car tuned, and LS tunes, I think usually these days cost around $900, depending on where you go and who you know. I would say we're gonna go in $900 on that front. Now, the reason I'm including the roll cage in there, because the factory CTS-V seats, as you can see in my street car, they have the seat belt included in the seat. So unless some guys have made harness bars that they weld to the A-pillar and made that work, but I went for the full roll cage because then you're pretty much good to drive at any track. And the stock seats don't do great when it comes to holding you in and things like that. So now I'm gonna tally up the total. That is if you want just a standard drift car. Now, like I said, you can upgrade motor mounts, you can upgrade bushings and things like that. That'll be additional. But I mean, ultimately, that won't really make or break whether or not you can drift the car. So let's add up our totals here. All right, the figures are in. Based off of what we listed with a $5,500 car, our total cost comes in at $20,135. Now, hear me out. I know that sounds like a lot. It's like sticker shock, I guess you could say. But price out if you were gonna buy a Japanese car. Now, I'm not comparing these to S chassis. I'm gonna compare them to Chasers. Price it out. If you had to go buy a Toyota Chaser with a manual, plus all the drift parts, it'd be hard for me to believe that you're not at that number. Also, you go buy a BMW, you LS swap it, put a T56 in it, get the proper rear end, all that stuff, plus all the same drift parts, I have a hard time believing you're not at that number or past it. So I will say, while it seems like a lot, there are some ways that you can cut that cost down. As I mentioned, you can keep stock seats, which keep your stock seatbelt, and that removes thousands, because if you just want to start drifting and getting into it, you don't need a cage. So you can cut off $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, almost $6,000 from that cost if you're not doing a $3,500 cage, $2,000 in seats, $650 in mounts and harnesses and all that. So like right there, if you don't think you need the cage right away, you're already down at $14,000. And that sounds a lot more enticing, I should say. If you don't want to do the cam right away, because these cars make 400 to the flywheel off the bat, again, you're saving yourself thousands of dollars. So now I'm going to do the math here, and I'm going to figure out how much I would be in my car if I didn't have all the engine work done. Now, I will say I'm going to keep that underdrive balancer, but we canceled out the cam kit. Let's see. So we're going to cancel out our cam kit. We're going to cancel out the machine work on the head. We won't need a tune anymore, but we are going to keep our underdrive pulley, and we are going to keep our headers. We're at 17.9. Now, we're going to remove our roll cage. We're going to remove our seats. We're going to remove our seat mounts, and we're going to remove our harnesses. We're going to keep the steering wheel stuff because drifting with the stock steering wheel just doesn't seem right to me. Guys, if you find a $5,500 high mileage V and you don't do the cage, the seats, the harnesses, and the internal engine work in the tune, we're at $11,425. $11,000 to have an LS powered car, rear wheel drive car on track that has dual caliper brackets, angle kit, coilovers, handbrake, like all the necessary drift mods. 11 grand. So like, I think even if you didn't want to do the cage and you spent a little bit more money on the car, I mean, for $15,000, I think you can expect to put together a good car. So what I'm saying is, I know a lot of people think, I'm gonna jump into this project, I'm gonna LS swap it, I'm gonna do this, do that. Look at the end number first. Plan ahead, like chart out that whole process, and basically figure out, is it gonna actually cost me more in the long run if I LS swap the car and do all this stuff? Because if you can get your hands on a low mileage or a low cost V, say jump into it. So without me rambling on any further, check out first gen CTSVs. If you're interested in a long wheelbase car, wheelbase is actually a little longer than JZX's. So if you're interested in a long wheelbase car that is already LS powered, already has LS wiring, the dash tells you everything you need to know. The only gauge I had to buy for my drift car was a wideband. Other than that, it tells me, the instrument cluster tells me everything I need. I highly recommend it. And the cost just really isn't that bad. Now I get it, it's not gonna drive like an FRS or an S chassis, which one of my buddies did drive my car, and he commented and saying it kind of felt like an S chassis in the sense that it was like kind of floaty on track and things like that. It's a heavy car. I would say it's probably comparable to like a JZX, but ultimately the cost isn't as bad as I think people would think. And then when you see that initial number at the end, that $20,000 number, imagine how long it's going to take you to build a car from scratch and LS swap a car. Two, how much do you think after that whole project is done nickel and diming you, how much do you think it's actually going to end up costing? I would be willing to bet that at the end of the day, I think the days of cheap LS swaps are gone. I mean, sure, you can get a 5.3 for $700, but then you're spending $2,500 on a T56. You're spending money on aftermarket clutch kits, and then you are spending money on harnesses, $1,000 on harnesses and things like that. All the stuff that this car already comes with. So I don't know. Take it into consideration. I'm just the V guy trying to convince you to buy a CTS-V and drift it. But also know that Stansco, www.stansco.jp, has all those drift specific parts that you need. So with that being said, I hope this was informative to you guys. I know I've been seeing a lot of people posting like, what does it cost to drift this car? And yeah, I mean, it'll do the trick for you. I should also mention that once you start getting into upgrading things like the bushings and the suspension and things like that, you know, you're gonna add costs, but you don't have to do all that stuff off the rip. I did it off the rip with that car because I spent so much time piecing my street car together over the years. It was just kind of like a buy once, cry once type of deal. But yeah, with that being said, check them out. You're gonna start seeing them more at the track. Just looking at what we've sold, I can assure you, CTSVs, first gen CTSVs are going to start popping up at the track more often. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for supporting the channel, all the CTS-V guys, and even all the 3000 GT guys that have hung around, and the new Trailblazer people that are here, and the Escalade people that are here. I appreciate all you guys for watching. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.